Hi, and welcome back to the 2023 Chase series. Last time we had a successful and satisfying chase in Iowa. We knew the weather would be dead for a handful of days, so we made our way toward Michigan to visit family and pick up Big Sister Kat in Chicago along the way. We decided to plop down in Jacksonville, Illinois for a few days to get work done and not have to be on the move so much. I started Googling abandoned places in the area because I'm always on the hunt for that. And as luck would have it, the first insane asylum in Illinois was right up the street from our hotel. So this is like part of the complex, I guess. And it's all boarded up. I don't know. What do you think this was? Really? For this insane asylum? So this says dietary. This complex is just huge. It's super extensive. So here, this says clothing center. This is really interesting. Like, we've been to other abandoned asylums and we've seen the same thing, like clothing center and stuff. We've seen a couple people walking their dogs around here, so we figure we're okay walking around. Whoa, look at this old bench. And they have like, I think that could be a tornado shelter, maybe. This maybe was like some kind of residence thing. Maybe for workers? I don't know. Normally when you hear insane asylum, you think of horrible abuse and sick experiments. And while the Jacksonville Developmental Center did have a rocky start, it later became a generally well-loved place for the residents. It opened in November 1851 and closed down 161 years later in November of 2012. It was originally called the Illinois State Asylum and Hospital for the Insane, with its final name change as the Jacksonville Developmental Center in 1975. Patients were kept at the hospital at the state's expenses. The Jacksonville Developmental Center began with a Kirkbride-inspired moral treatment focus. What the heck is moral treatment in Kirkbride? Well, moral treatment was the school of thought that the best way to reform a mentally ill patient is to treat them like a child rather than an animal. Yes, they actually had to come up with a term for that idea. And Kirkbride was a type of asylum built in a specific design that was based on the thought that the mentally ill do best in an organized environment with a strict but humane routine, and that the architecture of the building could help with treating the insane. A large center building with wings off each side and things like allowing natural sunlight and views of the countryside or nature into every room were common. Now, to really get into the importance of this place, we need to go back to the mid-1800s to a woman named Elizabeth Packard, a woman married to a Calvinist pastor. Because she disagreed with some of his teachings, he had her committed in 1851. How was that possible? Well, at the time, Illinois was one of only 3 states that had a state facility for mentally ill people. In order to commit someone, a trial jury was required, but that stipulation was changed slightly in 1851, when a trial jury was still required, but not for married women. A married woman could be accused of insanity and committed by her husband purely based on his request. Elizabeth Packard was obviously not insane, but based on her husband's request, she was committed nonetheless. Initially, she got along with the superintendent there, a man who had previously headed a well-respected asylum in New Hampshire. But after she refused to change her views, she fell out of favor and was committed to the 8th Ward, which is where the hopelessly insane and violent were sent. She never wavered from her beliefs, and to keep herself healthy and sane amongst the insane, she spent her time cleaning rooms, regularly exercising, and keeping proper hygiene. She began writing down her story and the stories of other patients, and eventually wrote a book about the inhumane conditions and mistreatment that occurred there. When her son turned 21, he was able to legally take his mom out, but she refused to leave, believing her husband would put her right back in, an astute prediction. After 42 months in the asylum, The superintendent declared her incurably insane and recommended she be discharged. When she finally did leave, her husband essentially held her prisoner by locking her in a room and boarding up her windows. She wasn't allowed to do anything without his approval, and he was making preparations to have her permanently committed to an asylum in Massachusetts. Elizabeth Packard's friends brought her husband to court in 1864. The case Packard versus Packard was unique for the time. Her husband's lawyers presented a certificate by Dr. McFarland, the superintendent from the asylum, declaring her insane, arguing she was being restrained until her husband could find more appropriate accommodations for her. Because the judge didn't think she appeared insane, he requested her husband and his lawyers actually prove her insanity. This was unusual for the judge to do that, and he had a jury decide if Elizabeth was insane. The evidence her husband provided was witnesses who testified to her unorthodox religious views and her repeated refusal to obey her husband's demands. Her lawyer's evidence was an essay she had written for her Bible study group in 1860 about her religious views. Elizabeth was allowed to read this essay to the court. Her rational explanation and charisma received a round of applause from the full courtroom when she was done. Her final witness was Dr. Alexander Duncanson, a physician and theologian. He had a 3-hour conversation with Elizabeth about her religious views, and even though he didn't agree with her on many things, he said he wouldn't call people insane because they differ from him. And he said that she was indeed sane and that he wished we had a nation of such women. It took the jury only 7 minutes to deliberate before they declared Elizabeth sane. Elizabeth and her husband actually never divorced, but they never lived together again, and she devoted her life to reforming mental health law. In 1867, the Mrs. Packard's Personal Liberty Law was passed. This guaranteed everyone the right to a jury trial in order to be declared insane in Illinois. She also helped pass similar reform laws in other states. Side note about all the attention Elizabeth Packard brought to the asylum. The superintendent, who was at one time an expert witness at the insanity trials of Mary Todd Lincoln and the assassin of President James Garfield, had his reputation damaged so badly he resigned from the Jacksonville Developmental Center and started his own private asylum. Later, he was diagnosed with a terminal illness and hung himself. Beginning around the 1940s, the shift of focus started drifting toward people with intellectual disabilities, and the institution began offering classes for nurses to be certified to work with psychiatric patients. That was from 1944 to 1974. The Kirkbride-style building we learned about earlier was demolished in 1970. There were amenities for the residents like a bowling alley, a theater, and a rec room. Here's a little insight into what it was like several months prior to the center closing down from budget cuts. There are 12 residents in a unit for the medically fragile. Persons who live here need more hands-on attention. A lot of them who live here need a tube to get nutrition. They require a nurse to be more readily available to them. In one dining room, picture boards are placed on the tables. The boards have pictures of things like forks or plates or napkins. They're for residents who cannot otherwise communicate their needs. They'll point to a picture of a plate or napkin, and this helps us know what they need because they can't vocalize. Many of the residents' rooms are personalized with pictures and other objects. Inside the building, we try to make it as home-like as possible. And it was home for many people over those 161 years. It was boarded up really well when we were there, and there were quite a few people walking around with their dogs or exercising. Oh my gosh, there's old couches. And there's another storm shelter. I think that's what it is. Dad said sometimes they put coal down these doors, so I don't know, but I feel like it looks like a storm shelter. Look, they like welded the door shut. I think they're trying to really not allow people in. Wow. Look at this. It's so big. I want to go down to that big building down there. I think this is probably all like residential buildings. Here's an old, I think that's like a swing set structure. So that must have been for kids. Look at this. It goes all the way back there, all the way there, there, there. It's super, super big. Yeah, it's like a miniature city. They had streets and yeah. We'll try a door. We haven't tried a door yet.
Wow, Party Central. Disgusting. People poop to that.
Oh my gosh.
Disgusting as that.
Ew. Totally locked, yeah.
That is nasty.
Sick. Just trying random doors. Look at that little thing. It's probably locked. Sure. We've been noticing. Whoa. Look, there's, oh my gosh, there's a wheelchair in there.
Fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, we've been noticing like a bunch of AA batteries everywhere. We're like, oh my freaking. Is that real? Okay. That is literally terrifying. What are all those wires around it? Ew, they're just sitting there. Gross.
It's very disgusting.
1847 to 1997. It was started in 1847 and had its first residents moved in 1851. And the last residents moved out in 2012. Hey, my birthday. Wrong year, but... Oh my gosh, they're gonna open it in 2047. Wow. Wonder what all these buildings were. Yeah, I said it was soldered earlier, but they're welded, not soldered. Whoa. Whoa, stairwell. See, look at that.
Okay, so people live here.
You might be able to find a way in if you really poked around, but it's like broad daylight, and there's a lot of people. What? Oh, wow. There's a lot of people around, so obviously we're not going to do a big investigation into this place. If you found this history interesting, hit subscribe and notify, because next time we're going to explore the Lincoln Developmental Center, which was originally called the Illinois Asylum for Feeble-Minded Children. Wow. It was pure luck that we stumbled across that place, and it's even more interesting than the Jacksonville Developmental Center. See you next time.